Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. My name is Julian Astle. I'm the Education Director here at the RSA. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all tonight. Little bit of housekeeping before we start, if I may. The event is being live streamed, so welcome to those of you who are watching online. It does mean, please, that if you could turn your phones to silent at the outset, that would be appreciated. And for those of you who are on Twitter and want to join the conversation on Twitter, we have a hashtag which is RSA Mission. Hashtag RSA Mission. So, I thought I'd just spend 2 or 3 minutes setting the scene for this event, explaining why we've decided to focus on the issue we have done, which is the importance of mission to excellent schooling. So, about a year ago, we published this document here, which is called the Ideal School Exhibition. And the Ideal School Exhibition tells 2 stories, one of which is rather depressing, and the other of which is extremely uplifting and inspiring. So the depressing story is about the damage that we believe is being done to the English school system by the sort of rather excessively constraining, high-stakes accountability system we have in this country. So our view is that external accountability, the way in which government holds schools to account for their performance, and using quite a limited number of crude performance metrics to do so, is distorting professional priorities and practices, misshaping the sector, creating all sorts of perverse incentives, undermining teachers' agency and professional self-identity, and most importantly of all, hollowing out and narrowing the education that lots of children receive, as schools, very understandably, considering the constant threat of sanction that sits behind the accountability system, focus on only those things that are measured to the detriment of those things that are unmeasured, but which most educators and most parents and pupils as well, I think, would consider to be important. That was the depressing story. The inspiring story is that there are schools out there who are simply refusing to play what I call the education by numbers game. Schools that have a very clear sense of their own values, their own vision, their own shared purpose, in short, what we call their own mission. And I wrote about a dozen such schools, including one that whose head teacher is with us tonight. But this evening we have 4 school leaders who, as you will find out during the evening, have a very clear sense of what they're about, what they're trying to achieve, what their mission is, and what sits beneath that mission, what's the educational philosophy, the approach, the values, the vision. So we're going to hear now from each of those school leaders in turn. We're going to start with Joe Saxton, who is the founder and CEO of Turner Schools, which is a small MAT based in Folkestone. And as Joe will explain, the model that her schools are based on is what people variously call knowledge-rich or knowledge-led or knowledge-informed, but knowledge is the key thing. We've got Mike Fairclough, who I mentioned a moment ago, who is from West Rise Junior School, and it's a highly unusual school, particularly for someone like me that is used to schools in the inner city. But Mike's school is all about character development, and Mike's going to talk about character. We've got Nicola Noble, who is the head teacher of Surrey Square Primary School in London, which has recently joined a new MAT called the Big Education Trust, joining together with School 21 and another school in Greenwich. And she's going to talk to us about what big education means and what that is about. And then last but definitely not least, Stephen Tierney, who is the executive head teacher of the BEBC Multi-Academy Trust, which is a group of Catholic schools. And in a sense, of course, this is the original mission, and Stephen's going to talk about faith and the importance of that to his model. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our speakers, and to Joe first of all. They're going to talk to you for about 5 minutes each, and when they're finished, we're going to sit on these rather comfy-looking chairs up here and chat about it. Thank you.
Good evening. It's a great honour to be in this amazing room with Romney on the walls around us. As Julian said, I'm Jo Saxton, and he asked me to say, talk about that, your Coles to Cambridge story, by which he means that my namesake, my maternal grandfather, was a child miner up in Sunderland, and that I ended up as a junior academic at Cambridge University. But I realised that schools are much more important and more exciting than universities. And so I now run a small family of schools on the Kent coast in Folkestone. It's an area of coastal isolation. It's a DFE priority area because young people there don't do as well as their peers in other parts of the land. And there's been long-standing educational underperformance in all of the schools that basically aren't the grammar schools. So that's my mission, is to overcome that underperformance. There are definitely days when I joke that it feels a bit like I've gone from the ivory tower to BTEC land. So the mission that I brought to the coast, that those who work in the Trust with me have, is we believe that it's knowledge that will make the difference. That experience, a skills-led approach, various other approaches, including selection, have been tried, and the empirical evidence would suggest that they haven't worked on a wide enough scale in that part of the world. So we believe that they need a foundational knowledge to have the skills and the ability to understand the world around them. And we know this because in our schools, in one in particular, we've realised that it doesn't matter what they can see, what the experiences are around them, they can't just pick that foundational knowledge up. They can see France, they can see the White Cliffs of Dover, and yet the majority of our pupils don't know that it's France, might not have been there, don't know what the White Cliffs are, don't understand that it's a geographical formation made of chalk. Even though they walk to school down Augustine and Ethelbert Road, they don't know that the founders, or the founding leaders of our country were there before them. Even though our school's actually named Martello Primary and has a Martello Tower in the playground, it took us to explain to them that that was an important military fortification from the Napoleonic days. So we are starting with the knowledge that we believe that they need to know, and we start in reception. They have named subject lessons. They have history, geography, visual arts. They could even tell you that they were doing physics, chemistry, or biology. They know the difference between the three sciences. So that's sort of how extreme, if you like, we've gone with the subject-led, knowledge-based approach. So our thesis, therefore, is that even though we live in a digital age, children, especially the disadvantaged, can't just look it up. They need knowledge to give them the foundation to succeed. Thank you.
How does mine suddenly come on? Somebody do. Techie do this. Do I press a button? Oh, there we go. Good. As you can see, I'm better with a stick than I am with a computer. So my name is Mike Fairclough. I'm the head teacher of West Rise Junior School in Eastbourne. My talk's about character education with a particular emphasis on resilience, freedom, and self-discipline. Just to put it into context, we've got 360 children in the school, deriving mainly from the local council estate, and it's a school for 7 to 11-year-olds, so it's a junior school. We have 120 acres of marshland opposite the school, including 3 large lakes, and that's where we do all of our outdoor learning, and it's also the site of a very large Bronze Age settlement dating back about 3,000 years, so late Bronze Age. We've built a replica Bronze Age roundhouse on the school site with the children, which is very much in keeping with our philosophy of embracing risk and danger. So we believe that if we expose children to calculated risk and danger, they're more able to manage risk effectively and safely themselves. There's Year 5 thatching the roof of the roundhouse. Of course, it comes with the inevitable splinters, cuts and bruises with this kind of project. But I think as a school, that's what we're preparing children for, not just physically, but also metaphorically, because that is part of life. That is what happens in life. Here's year 6 laying the wood on the causeway. You'll notice there's not a high-vis jacket in sight. All of the children will learn certain prehistoric skills as well. So every child will learn to smelt tin and copper to make bronze, for example. So they'll use bellows and an earth kiln. And when the molten metal has reached 1,000 degrees centigrade, they'll pour the molten metal into casts of arrowheads, just as perhaps their ancestors did. Foraging for food is something else that they'll do, like bulrush roots and nettles, etc. Plucking pheasants, I have to be very careful how I say that, and skinning rabbits is another activity which some children will do. Now, a really interesting fact about the Bronze Age is that the average age of a person during the Bronze Age was 14, because people only lived to about the age of about 30. So think about the late Bronze Age. You've got seafaring, international trade. You've got elaborate arts and crafts being created, not just out of bronze, but also of gold. Sophisticated social structures. So the architects of this society, the movers and shakers, the people who sustained it, are those who we would consider today to be children. So the obvious question from that is, are our expectations of children today too low? And are children capable of much more than we realise? And the answer to both of those questions is yes. We have a herd of 6 Asian water buffalo on the school site. A lot of what we do is about moving children out of their comfort zones, and there's nothing like being confronted by a huge horned water buffalo to do just that. When we face our fears, when we rise to particular challenges, that's when we can experience rapid leaps in personal development, which is the whole concept behind moving out of the comfort zone. All of our children will learn beekeeping as well, and this is a really lovely project with World War II veterans. So the veterans and the children have together created the beehives together. They made them out of wood. And whilst they've been doing that, the veterans have been telling the children war stories, and the children have been asking them questions. And for me, these guys are like the living legends of grit and resilience, and are excellent role models to all of the generations below them. Again, this is a project about moving out of the comfort zone. So a child who will run away from a single bee in the playground will have hundreds of them all over them as they inspect the hives. And after they've had that experience, they are visibly changed. We have a forest school on the site as well. So this is very much about connecting very deeply with nature, making fires, cooking over an open fire, multiple other activities. In the depths of winter, children will be working outside in sub-zero temperatures and in the driving rain. And again, this builds resilience. But it's not just about resilience, it's about freedom. So the children will not be directed to do particular activities. We empower them to be self-directed. So we don't want our children to merely be resilient, we also want them to be free thinkers. Again, along the theme of freedom, this time creative freedom, we've got an art studio on the school site called Room 13. This is run by a committee of children. There is an artist in residence who's there, but she's not there to direct, she's there to inspire. So children themselves decide whether they're going to be doing drawing, painting, sculpture, digital media, and whatever subject matter they like. And the reason for this is that back in the main school, due to the constraints of the curriculum and the demands of the curriculum, learning needs to be much more directed, and there's a place for that, very much so. But because so much of it is directed, we've tried to create opportunities for children to express their freedom and autonomy. Finally, in parallel with resilience and freedom, there's also self-discipline. So I always say to a child, if you can't put your hand up in the classroom, I'm not going to give you a knife or a gun, which hopefully you'll agree is a sensible suggestion. I think that if we shield children from guns, knives and fires, that they will find an unhealthy outlet for those pursuits. So once a year they have the opportunity to learn about, they'll do clay pigeon shooting and learn about the correct and legal use of a gun, which totally takes the glamour out of firearms. And on a weekly basis, it will be knives and fires, again, the legal and correct use, which has the same desired effect. So ultimately, the school is about a combination of resilience, freedom and self-discipline, which we think makes the whole child, and we feel that these are the essential character traits for a happy and successful future life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, it's lovely to be here. So I am Nicola Noble and have been working at Surrey Square, which is situated in Southwark, for the past 12 years, and in the last few years have been in the capacity as head teacher. Surrey Square is situated on the Aylesbury estate, which is the biggest social housing estate in Western Europe, and as you can imagine, brings with it a number of challenges. Crime, poverty are two things that our families face in a very real way. So we have a really clear mission of personal and academic excellence, everyone, every day. And we have a set of values which we live our life by. Those values enable us to teach the children about personal excellence, develop them as people, enabling them to then achieve the academic excellence that we want them to, and then be ready to take on adolescence and the world beyond that. We're part of the big education trust, which was formed after lots of conversations. We came into being on the 1st of September this year with 3 founding schools, which are us, School 21, which is an all-through school in Newham, and the International Academy of Greenwich, which is a secondary free school in Greenwich. Those schools seem very different, but are united by some shared fundamental beliefs. Firstly, that school must provide education, which is not solely focused on preparing for and passing exams, but an education of the whole child, the head, the heart and the hand, equipping them to make a difference in the world. Secondly, a deep-rooted belief that our role as educators extends beyond our own school. Leaders have a clear ambition to make an impact beyond one institution, an impact within a heavily accountable system in which we operate. We have a big ambition, which can often feel impossible or overwhelming as one lone school leader, but bring together that ambition with other school leaders, and suddenly the impossible seems possible. So the Big Education Trust has a clear vision, bringing together strength and individuality to innovate and make a bigger impact. It's founded on 3 pillars. Firstly, obviously, creating great schools, which are distinct. They're centres of excellence where good results and offset gradings are just a minimum requirement and not the sole goal for a child's education. They're schools where it's about every day, every child, every lesson, where a rich curriculum enables the development of a whole child, generating and harnessing their individual passions. It's a curriculum embedded in real-world learning where we assess and value things which we think are important. So, for example, speaking has the same value as reading and writing. The second pillar is creating programmes to support the development of rigorous innovation and new thinking in our schools, seeking to reinvigorate teaching and find new ways to inspire the next generation. The third element is building a wider movement of individuals and organisations, united by a common purpose, growing and building capacity to shape our future world and change the story of education. So the Big Education Trust, like our 3 schools, is built on a clear set of values. Everyone, every day. Focus on the head, heart and hand, striving for academic and personal excellence. We're deliberately different. We're schools and organisations which are strong in our own identities, providing catalysts for new thinking. We're authors of our own story, striving for mastery, autonomy and purpose within a system which can often counterbalance that. We're in it for everyone, open, deeply collaborative, all seeking for this wider impact with a common moral purpose. And finally, there's Spark. We're unlocking the passion that energises everyone, the children, the teachers within the profession and the wider community. And by living these values, we believe we will realise our big ambitions, enabling us to change the story and deliver a bigger and bolder vision of what education can and should be about.
This is one of those great moments where you come up last and you think, I agree with everybody, thank you very much, and sit down. My name's Stephen Tierney. I'm CEO of a trust in Blackpool, which is called BEBCMAT. Before that, as head of the secondary school, which is an 11 to 18 school for 14 years. Fundamentally, we believe that education is an act of love. It's a giving to the next generation of that which we hold sacred and believe is important. And part of our story is rooted in a belief in God and a belief in humanity. And that helps form what we think is important, because the difficult thing about education is what you leave out, not just what you put in, because there is so much that could fit in. And so one of the things that I'd say and pay due deference to my colleagues who have actually developed mission as well as articulated it, I didn't develop the school's mission. It's a 2,000-year-old story that I'm just trying to be the best storyteller that I can be, because I'm just a link in a chain. I will lead St Mary's and Bebsemat for a certain amount of time. There was somebody before me and there's somebody who came after me. And the education is rooted within the pastoral mission of the church. And so there's kerygma, liturgia, diaconia and koinonia. And you'll be thinking, oh yes, Steve, I know exactly what you mean there. And so basically we're trying to be a worshipping community and a proclaiming community. This is what we believe is important. But we're also trying to be a serving community and one that is engaged in terms of being a civic community with others. So how does that play out? It plays out in an education that we believe is ultimately for wisdom. It is about the head, the mind, the body and the soul, and it is about the development of the whole child, but not just as an individual, but a person in community. And so we go back to a story of the I and the we. So rooted deep within Catholic education is a belief that you have to become the best person, the best version of yourself you can be. However, you have a responsibility to enable others to do the same. And so it is that balancing of I and we. And you get wonderful expressions of people like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who talks about Ubuntu. And he talks about I am because we are. And he says that we are people formed in a community. And so that first community is your family. And so I'm now a granddad. So especially, this is the first time I've mentioned Zach in a talk, but it will be happening again. And he's learnt to smile, and he will learn to love, and he will learn to be part of a family. And he will also then have to become part of a wider society in which we will have to limit what we may want to do as individuals for the benefit of us all. We move into a public space. And schools are part of that public space. So how do we help children both to flourish as individuals, but also be good citizens, good people in community? And I think Archbishop of York, John Sentamu, continues that theme when he talks about education, about being rooted in educare and educare. And so he talks about a teaching and a training. And we would look, and to be part of that great conversation of humanity, you have to understand the conversation that has been, so you don't necessarily repeat it unnecessarily. But also make it part of your time, to bring it to currency. But also to think about what we could be and what humanity could be. And there's the root in. But he also talks about it's got to be a leading and a drawing out of the person and the individual. So we don't see knowledge works against character. We would see these as part and parcel of the education of the whole child. And finally, I'll leave you with the thought, and this is Reverend Stephen Chalk, and I've deliberately picked examples, none of these are Catholic, to try and show that actually people across faith can work. And he says, it's not simply about what you do with your life. It is about who you become as you do it. And so I actually don't have a problem with students doing really well in exams, because I think the other option, that they do really badly in exams, is something that we should support. However, that isn't everything, nor should it be, because it's not simply what I know and what I can do, but who I become as I do it. And so that root of Catholic education, which tells a story that is 2,000 years old, is about developing a wisdom, about being a person who can flourish, but about being a person in community. And just a final reflection, it enables you to look at certain things that are current with a kind of a passing interest. So I'm actually CEO of a trust, and I could take or leave maths if I'm honest. I have no particular preference for whether we're a math or we're not. What it allowed us to do was to work as 3 schools very powerfully together. Because maths will come and go. But actually working powerfully together for the good of the children is what we should be about. Thank you.
Okay, so much to discuss, and my first reflection listening to that is how nice it was to sit with some educators and not hear anybody mentioning SATs or attainment 8 or progress 8 or open buckets or expected levels or any of this. And the reason it's nice isn't because exams don't matter. We need to be clear about this. I remember when I visited Mike's school, he said to me, look, it's not that I'm not interested in exams. He says, if you don't, he said, asking a head teacher not to worry about exam results is be like asking a milkman not to worry about delivering milk. It's like that is the core job. But it's the problem with this, the problem with the culture that has grown up, I think, is that collectively, as a society, we can't see education's real goals because we're so fixated on the proxy goals. You know, because tests and targets and league tables and Ofsted judgments are proxy goals. They're not the point of education. The point of education is to prepare young people in the way, whatever way we see fit, think best, for further study, for work, and to live a good life, fundamentally. And I just thought it was so refreshing to hear people talking about those issues in an education system where it all seems to be about the proxy measures. So I'm going to start off by just saying I'm interested to know how useful having a very clear sense of mission is to you guys as you run your schools, and how you take that sort of high-level mission statement, the sorts of things we've just heard, and actually translate that into a day-to-day reality in your school. So how do you take a mission and use that to inform all the things you do, hour by hour, day by day, the way the culture you create, the curriculum that you develop, the policies, the protocols, the rituals, the routines that make up school life? How is all of that informed by mission? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I think I will. So for me, the school, I think, is a result of my upbringing. So I was brought up by a guy who's now dead, but he grew up in the war years. So I think for my age group, I'm quite privileged to have been raised by an older father who survived the bombings in Manchester, and he was an Irish immigrant and all that kind of stuff. And then he later became an actor. He joined RADA and he became a Shakespearean actor and became extremely bohemian. So I had this sort of like interesting mixture of traditional and alternative upbringing. So I was completely feral, running around the woods with guns and hunting and stuff. And there was an expectation that I should do really well in school and I should respect my elders and so on and so forth. And it's basically, I'm just playing out that kind of like story of my childhood in my school now. I mean, I'm just still running around the place with guns and on quad bikes and animals and all the rest of it. And I also have a very traditional approach to education in the sense that I expect children to do their very best. I want them to be resilient and to be able to, when they fall over, get up, brush themselves off and get on with it. And I think there's a real place for that, particularly now that I feel that as a culture, the system is trying to disempower children, whether it's intentional or not, I don't know, but all this talk of anxiety and depression, etc., and some of the statistics are incredibly dubious, are not empowering young people. So in terms of its use within my community, which is one with social and economic issues and high unemployment, etc., it's exactly the right sort of, I'm going to use the word vibe, because I'm a hippie as well, that is needed. That's my response.
Great. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I would say that having a very clear mission does is help you make the difficult decisions. You know, as Stephen said, the difficult thing in education is what you have to leave out. And so if I think of our particular context, taking on a school where young people hadn't done well enough over a significant period of time, you know, we had to decide which is more important, that they do a lot of dance lessons, which they love, and they can dance in the Olympic Stadium and brilliant things, or recognise the fact that more than half of them aren't reading at their chronological age by the time they get to GCSEs, and learning to read is going to be more important. So we've had to make some deeply unpopular decisions, prioritise reading, writing, arithmetic, and dance is the thing that we've sacrificed. It's not that there's no dance, but there's a lot less of dance. So I think it's the thing that helps you sleep at night, because you know that the mission is making sure that in the decisions you make, you remember to put the children's greater interest first.
I think for us, it gives real clarity for everybody. So every stakeholder, every member of staff can articulate what the mission is, why they're there, and why they've chosen that school. And we're very open in the fact that this is our mission, this is what we expect from people. We expect you to value the personal just as much as you value the academic, and we expect to see that in your behaviours and what the opportunities that the children have. And if that's not for you, that's totally fine. There are 24,000 other schools you could go and get a job at, but actually that's what it means to work here. So I think for staff it gives a real clarity, which is really, really important when you're working in really challenging circumstances, particularly, that you are all on the same path together. And I totally agree around the making decisions. You know, we have 6 values we live our life by, and those values can often really come into conflict. So you can have a situation where you need to show immense compassion, which is one of our values, but then at the same time you need that individual to take responsibility. So I think you always come back to, well, what's right for the child, what's going to allow that personal and academic excellence. So it's a reference point, everyone's on the same path, and yeah, it is just helpful.
Stephen, before I bring you in, I forgot to tell the audience that Stephen has to leave us at 7 because he has to get the last train back up to the north. But it's important you know that, so you don't think he's just got bored of it halfway through the conversation. Stephen, your thoughts on that?
I think I look at, on a good day in BEB-CMAT, we've got about 1,800 people working, the children and the staff. But we're also kind of linked to 1,000 parents, potentially. That's a huge number of people to try and get going in a certain direction of travel. And part of the mission allows you to define what you are, what you're not, what you will stand for, what you won't allow. And sometimes it's better by simple stories. So I'm sat down, I've excluded a young lad who's thumped some other pupils. Dad comes in and says, they called him names, and I'm telling you, Mr. Tierney, I've told him if they call him names again, that he thumps them. Okay, but that's not our story, I say. Because our story is that actually we will turn the other cheek. And he wasn't faced with a situation where he had no other option. It was basically a decision to thump people because that's what he wanted to do, because he'd got angry. So as a parent, I'm now telling you that's not what we'll stand for. And it won't matter. And our story hasn't changed. And so that would look at it in terms of kind of a self-discipline. But you could also look at it as a positive contribution. So I've lost slightly track of time. On Monday, in every single form across the whole school, each form will get 2 name tags with 2 names on. Joey and Frida. Joey's 3 years old, Frida is 92. You've now got Advent, the preparation for Christmas, to spend some time thinking about what might these people actually enjoy in terms of a contribution from you for Christmas. To raise some monies, to go and buy it, and then we collect it, and then we distribute it via other organisations, partly because of the sensitivity to those people. And if somebody says, oh, well, that's not a good use of form time, I can say, well, actually, I disagree. Because part of what we're called to do is to serve the community that we live in. And so what it allows you to do is it allows you to convert everyday decisions with some degree of, I'd say, almost predictability about what might you do. Because these things are important to us. So it holds you together, it gives you a sense of direction.
That's great. So When I was writing this piece and I visited the 12 schools that I write about, one question I asked the head teacher in every school was, can you name something that you do in this school, a decision you've taken, a priority you've established, that is irrational or illogical from the perspective of satisfying the demands of external accountability? Right? So the government is sending implicit instructions, directions to schools about the things that the government cares about, because they're the things that it measures, and things it publishes. So what do you do that simply doesn't go near all of that? And every single one of them had a long list of things they did that didn't show up in the data. But it was interesting how it varied. So schools that have knowledge at the core of their mission, that points in the same direction, actually, as the assessment, the exams. It doesn't take you in a different direction. But even in those schools, they would say, well, we don't teach to the test, we teach well beyond the test. You know, we choose the harder text rather than easier. You know, we'll do Hamlet, not Blood Brothers, or whatever it may be. But they were decisions that if your only consideration was getting good performance numbers and an elevated league table position, you wouldn't take that decision because there are easier ways of doing that. But then there are other schools, like yours, where there are non-academic, non-assessed, unmeasured outcomes that you guys care deeply about, right? And every minute that your kids are down in the field with the water buffalo is a minute they're not focusing on something that will appear in the league table. So I'm wondering how difficult it is to stay true to your mission when you've got this constant magnetic pull of assessment and external accountability, which is, as we know, very hard-edged.
So for me, with the whole kind of water buffalo stuff and all the rest of it, I don't see it as being different to that agenda. So, for example, we have an annual Spirit of the Marsh Day, where children, the whole school will go out and they'll be out in the marshes in all weathers, smelting tin and copper to make bronze, like I said, foraging for food, dyeing wool from our sheep, etc., etc. And what they're doing is they're tuning into the sort of the spiritual essence of the land, and also to the ancestors of the land. What they'll do when they go back into the classroom is they'll write about the Bronze Age from the perspective of a Bronze Age person or from the perspective of the marsh. And the language, the vocabulary is absolutely electric because they've actually been there. So if you try and teach the Bronze Age to children sitting in a classroom with an interactive whiteboard for an hour, you'll get reasonable results and so on and so forth. If you actually take them outside and you make them time travel back in history to the time when they're actually being Bronze Age people, then you get the rich, alive writing. So there's a definite link between hands-on creative education and academic attainment, and our results in terms of SATs, reading, writing, maths, spelling, punctuation, grammar have risen year on year as we've had this sort of approach. So I believe that the two things are not separate. They're about the same thing, and at the same time, a big motivation for me doing all of this stuff is simply because it's fun. It's like, oh, let's get a herd of water buffalo.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, I think it's interesting you see knowledge as sort of aligned with the exams agenda, because it definitely doesn't feel like that on the ground. Okay. If I think about one of our primary schools where there's significant pressure on us in terms of accountability to get the Key Stage 2 results up, because they've been weak for a long time before we got there. But we aren't playing that game, and by that I mean we give a significant amount of time to things which will never come up on a SATs test. Teaching some ancient history, the Renaissance in art, things that are, where a lot of schools would be doing generic SATs prep, we didn't do it. And for example, in our summer SATs, the summer just gone, the children, our year 6, were able to answer the question that quite a few children nationally couldn't. They understood what the word lame meant, and that it was to do with having an injured leg in the context, I think it was of a horse. But they didn't necessarily get the marks because we didn't say to them, it's a one-word answer, and they would answer with 2 words, for example. So we're taking a much longer-term view. We teach the right content, and in time we'll get there. We're not playing the let's grill them in how many marks they need to get for each question.
Yeah, I certainly wasn't suggesting that
I
you
know,
guys are
but
doing
I'm just-
exam prep. I was just saying that I can see closer links between subject-specific teaching and exams than I can between the water buffalo. And Mike's example was, well, it's really helpful when they write an essay about the Bronze Age, but it's probably, you could have picked examples where it's less helpful. Learning about angles in a triangle. You know, I'm sure you can teach all these things through those experiences, but the most obvious example of where what you do and what the assessment system and the accountability system are looking for aligned is an essay about the Bronze Age. And I was just simply saying that
I know what you're saying, but I think it's about being brave to trust that your mission will work in time.
Yeah.
But there are definitely quicker fixes that we could have done if accountability was the main driver.
Yeah. Anyone else want to?
Just in terms of different things, I think we sometimes get, if you like, an examination system and accountability confused with the same. And part of the problem in England is it's the high stakes accountability system which drives some of the nonsense within it. And so I've always taken the view that although external forces may limit me, what I can do as a leader, they will never define me. And so that becomes a different kind of perspective. So the kind of countercultural thing you can do, it's a day and a half of appeals trying to get into St Mary's because we're oversubscribed. In some ways it's lovely because you've got parents saying how fabulous this school is and they must get their child in. And in another moment it's heartbreaking because you know hardly any of them are going to get in because you're already full. And I'm sat and there's a woman come in, she's sat down, she's not massively articulate, she's quite emotional. The story starts to unfold. And the story that unfolds is basically she's a victim of domestic violence. She's come to Blackpool because she once had a good holiday there so she can remember some good times. The family has next to nothing. She's lost all her social contacts in terms of because she's left the community, even though it might have been great for her. At least she knew people there. So she's no social capital there. You know this is going to be a negative progress 8. But the kind of defence I put up was probably the weakest of the day. And I just said the following morning to staff, they'll be coming here. She's one of ours. I just recognise the family. And you're at schools across Blackpool who are doing that kind of work. And all credit to them. So that's the kind of countercultural place you find yourself in terms of looking and saying, right, okay, our accountability system is mad. Do not teach in a school with white working class boys. It's a disaster. It is Russian roulette with your career. You want to open a free school for Chinese or Indian girls. That's where it's all about. But somebody's got to work in our most disadvantaged communities, and that's part of the countercultural work that we've got to do in terms of sense of mission. How we do it might be slightly different, but it's needed.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I found when I was talking to these sort of very mission-led school leaders was the amount of bravery it takes to stick to your mission in that system. And I'm interested, I don't know, Nicola, whether you've got an observation on this, but the role not just of the head teachers in providing cover, protecting everyone in the school from those external pressures, but the role of trustees, governors and so forth in doing that. I mean, and to explain why this is a very live issue in my mind, so the RSA, as well as being this wonderful membership organisation, research organisation, also sponsors 7 schools in the West Midlands. We're an academy sponsor. And we are currently in a collaborative process that the sponsor, the RSA, and the 7 schools of trying to define what it means to be an RSA school, to sort of put down what our mission is on paper. And of course the church has long done this, and the diocese will go and inspect faith schools. And yes, it looks at standards and so forth, but it's really looking at fidelity to mission, to the ethos. It's that stuff it's looking for. And I guess what we're trying to do at the RSA is, as an academy sponsor, is to come up with a secular version of that framework. What's the role of governors, of trusts and so forth in setting out what the mission is and of providing the cover to everyone in the school community to stay fixed on that, even though the returns sometimes take longer to appear.
I think really practically it's even how you organise things. So at Surrey Square, there's, for governors, there's an operations committee doing all the boring stuff. And then there's the mission community, committee, who have a really clear understanding of what that mission is, but we live it in practice. So within that committee, they're testing out, are we meeting our academic excellence part of the mission, and are we meeting the personal excellence part of that mission? So both of those things are reported on. Governors challenge and question. So they're not just focused on, well, what are your end of year results, what's the in-year data? They genuinely have an understanding of what we mean by personal excellence and how we're working in that way. So I think it's not just saying it, it's living it. And you have to live it through every aspect of that life, and everybody has to understand that. So there's also something about, governors can often feel, and trustees, quite removed, I think, from the schools within which they are governors or trustees. So it's also how you bring them into school life whilst also recognising that they're volunteers, and the experiences that you give them. So again, we have a pastoral meeting which happens every week, which is I'd say the sort of backbone of the school, where I can honestly put my hand on my heart and say, because of that meeting and that team of people, no child is missed. No tiny dirt that's on someone's collar or their shirt cuff is noticed, and it's brought up there. And so for governors, sitting within that meeting is really important for them to get an understanding of, why do we talk about personal excellence? It's because we're facing these challenges. Our families are facing these challenges. And unless we support our families to overcome these challenges, academic excellence you can forget, because we've got to meet these needs. So I think that understanding is critical.
Just in terms of, I kind of look at governance, and it's that ability to take the longer view. So, many times within the system, you kind of argue as a head, well, I'm as good as my last Progress 8 or my last Progress score. And if I was to fall, but being faithful to mission, would you kick me or pick me up? And it's not that I want that I want you to accept my negligence for decades. That's not what I'd argue. It's actually, I simply won't always get it right. And things might vary at times. But if I'm true to the mission that you set me to be true to, will you as governors actually pick me up, dust me off, and make sure that I learn from it and actually move in the right direction? It's not a call to accept failure or poor standards, but it's a call to accept humanity and the messiness of life as it is.
I'm going to open this up to the audience. I'm sure people have got questions. Wait for the microphone. If you could wait and then get annoyed into the microphone.
Okay, Lois Acton. I'm an ex-head of department in a comprehensive, and we're talking about primary schools. I'm also a free schooler from the 70s, so set up one of the first free schools in this country. And I despair to hear some of the conversations about what we're teaching our kids. To be quite honest, I think that the curriculum needs to be drastically changed more in the direction of what Mike's talking about, because we're not educating any of our children in this country for the future of what they're going to have to deal with and what they're going to have portfolio careers. We're talking primary school here, so I understand you've all got a difficult job. I live near your school. I was a head of department in that area, but I've also worked at Liverpool Free School. So my questions are two, I suppose. How can you all sit there adhering to the way that the government is driving what our children are being given as to me, the most appalling curriculum I have ever seen, that's completely irrelevant to their lives? I could not teach, and I certainly would not want my granddaughter going into most of the education that's on offer here. I want her to be resilient, testing, have a dream of a future that is not embedded in our past. I'd love to hear what you think.
And I totally agree with you. And so again, our learning is embedded in real world learning, and our learning projects start with a teacher passion, which can be about anything. And the idea is that it starts with a very big question which children can't answer, and then they go through a journey of discovery, and at the end of it, they present their learning to a real audience in a certain way. So and the curriculum fits in where it can, and where it doesn't, it doesn't. And I think you have to be bold in that sense, because if you just we're just doing what the national curriculum tells you to do, you do end up with a really narrow curriculum. But you have to be bold to do it, and you have to do it knowing that by doing that, you're going to engage them in their learning, you're going to excite them, you're going to enthuse them, they're going to want to come to school, which means they're going to do brilliantly because they want to actually be there. So I totally agree with you, but and you can use that to also be teaching the basic skills that they need, and teach them all the character which we've been talking about, all those character traits, which again, when they go into the workplace, they need to be able to show those, because that's what employers are looking for.
I would like to say something, please, if I may, and it's that, so I agree with you completely. I would also like to say that there's some really amazing kind of loopholes within the system. So, for example, the national curriculum for history and geography is like, there's like 2 sentences. I mean, there's so much scope for freedom within the current system. Also, Amanda Spielman, the Chief Education Officer, has recently sort of said that schools can be judged more on their kind of broad and balanced curriculum, etc. Well, there's a gift right there. So I think there are some brilliant things going on. However, in the 25 years that I've been in primary education, I've seen 12 education ministers, 3 changes of government. I think we'll be waiting forever if we're waiting for the system to kind of come down like a sort of a messiah and heal everything. I think that's one point. Secondly, there isn't a one-size-fits-all education system that's desirable anyway. And ultimately, the profession is full of mavericks and visionaries and rebels. And I think, you know, if we can just kind of be empowered to follow what our heart's desire is, then we can kind of like play the system, break a few rules, and achieve the end which ticks the boxes and gets our children happy at the same time.
Anyone else want to come in? You don't feel we have to? We can go to the next question?
I would just like to say one thing, which is I think it's that we mustn't forget that the national curriculum doesn't tell us how we have to teach. It just tells us the minimum what. And so I think don't forget that. You know, people think that, you know, it looks like a boring list, therefore it must be really dry. You can still teach it in innovative, engaging, fun ways. And so I think that's, you know, that's the thing to bear in mind.
Also, your question or challenge perplexes me in one crucial respect, which is that the reason we've picked these 4 people to come up here tonight is precisely because they aren't just carrying out the government's wishes, and they're not delivery agents for government policy. They're challenging all of that. They're doing their own thing, and that's what makes them so great. It's what makes their schools so interesting. The core is one. Yeah, the national curriculum.
Well, it's the core idea that those are the basic things that we actually need in life.
Yeah, indeed. So, and again, this brings us into an interesting issue which I had to deal with when writing about mission-led schools, which is how far into that discussion to go. I stopped at the point of saying having a mission is really, really valuable and to be applauded, because it's at the core of what makes a great school. Gives everyone a sense of belonging, a sense of motivation, a sense of identity, clear sense of direction, all of these things. What I didn't get into was the my mission's better than your mission discussion. You clearly have a very clear sense of what you think the mission should be. I'm not sitting in judgment on that at all. I'm just saying having one is really important, because the alternative to having a mission is that you simply bear the imprint of the government's boot. You start with, well, what I'm being asked to do by the government. Any other questions from the gentleman on the aisle there, and then I'll take the gentleman at the back.
Phil Ward, I'm a head teacher in South West London in the independent sector. Each of your missions are very powerful and compelling and impressive. I lead a school with a values-led approach mission. And what interests me, because it's our daily challenge, is how do you find, select, recruit, and above all professionally develop colleagues who are completely committed in an ongoing way to your mission in your schools?
That's a great question. I'm going to take a second one as well from gentleman in the glasses and the white shirt there. That's it.
Thank you. I just wanted to understand a little bit more about, just listening to what you've said, obviously the mission-based ideology is a very powerful one here, but it seems to be that it corresponds very much, based on the audience that we have here, or the panel that we have, to a demography of students that are coming from perhaps underprivileged environments. And I wanted to understand whether you think that these mission-based schools are best placed to respond to that demography, or whether actually it can correspond to a wider audience as well.
That's great. 2 questions. Stephen, I'm going to bring you in because I'm conscious of time. You're going to have to leave us shortly.
Okay, this is going to be a short answer. In terms of the school I lead, although it's sat in probably the most disadvantaged local authority, or certainly was in 2015, it's quite comprehensive in terms of intake. So my job tomorrow is to brush up on my Cambridge interviewing skills, because I've got to interview 2 pupils who are trying to get to Cambridge. So if there's any from Cambridge here, look out for Madison, look out for Victor, give them a place. So we work across the actual divide, but we would see as an integral part of our mission to support those that can't support themselves as well. And so it's not that would exclude pupils from more affluent backgrounds, of which we have a number. It's just where we think the greatest support might be needed is for those who are not able to support themselves, or whose families can't support them as well. Your point is brilliant in terms of getting people to align, particularly when you inherit. Because when you inherit a school, depending upon how close to the mission it is, you may have quite a lot of different practice. So in other words, whenever you do a talk like this, I always shine our school up and present the best that we can be on a good day when it's sunny, not when the rain is coming in from the Irish Sea and it's horizontal and it's a Friday afternoon. And part of the challenge that we're facing is, how do we recruit? So we have questions that we will ask at interview. We will look at different ways of interviewing people to kind of check where their heart and their head and their soul is. And so that recruitment process is there, but also that professional development process is there in terms of it. And also, if we can keep getting the culture right, they kind of immersed within it. So the person that was an agnostic, who's still an agnostic, who seems to go on every single retreat we ever have because he can see value in it, is a powerful way of taking it forward. And so I think your question provides, for me, one of the leadership challenges. This will not work if I think something and nobody else does. So how do we take all forward? At a time, church going, certainly within the Catholic Church, is on the decline. I go to Sunday Mass, I'm often the youngest person there. It's wonderful. It's the only place where I feel young. And that's a real challenge for us.
Joe, do you want to talk about the issue of disadvantage? Listening to you, it sounded to me as though your belief in the centrality of knowledge was rooted in the idea that cultural literacy is the key to social mobility, opportunity, and so forth.
I suppose I've had experience teaching, obviously, at Cambridge University, and I taught for a very short time at a very well-known, very old private school. And worked out quite quickly that I just didn't feel like those kids needed me. And a particular sort of light bulb moment for me was during a tutorial at Cambridge, where we were teaching, actually I think it was Renaissance painting, and we had a boy who'd been supported to university through Access Project, and a young lad who'd come from Eton, and the lad from Eton's grandparents owned the painting that I was showing them, and the other lad didn't even know, where Italy was, let alone that this was an Italian Renaissance painting. And I guess it was sort of that made me think, how is it you could get to Cambridge and actually not know some of this stuff? Now, maybe you don't need to know about Renaissance paintings to survive in the 21st century. That's sort of not my point. But my point is, there is not a level playing field, and what can we do about levelling it? And for me, that is about teaching the best that's been thought and known from as early as possible.
So cultural capital is the key thing that you think distinguishes disadvantaged kids from more affluent, luckier kids? So.
And I think, there's conflicting research, isn't there? But there is a body of knowledge, of research that shows that to be able to learn something new yourself by reading it, so for example on the internet, you already need to know the meaning of 70 or 80% of the words on that page. So what better way are we going to help young people by learn those words before they meet them on a screen than in a school context?
Don't know, should we take more questions, or did either of you want to come in on those?
I've had quite a lot to do with Bedale School, which is a private school, which has, you mentioned Head, Hand and Heart, which is John Hayden Baddeley's sort of philosophy of education. That's definitely a school with a different demographic to mine, which has a very, very strong sense of purpose. So I think that it's completely possible that it can be, I mean, I don't know whether it's chance or not that we're from these particular kinds of schools, but definitely it's applicable to every single demographic in society. And then in terms of the recruitment and retention thing, when Julian came over with his colleague and did the this sort of action research project for the Ideal Schools exhibition, I found myself kind of asking sort of a similar kind of question and wondering myself how things roll in my school, because I don't micromanage anyone at all. And it was Julian who said, actually, I've realised what you do. You set an ethos and you kind of like hope people will kind of go along with it. And that's exactly what it is. Now, when it comes to interview, everyone will 100% say, yes, I love being outside and I love room 13. Once they're through the door, there's a scale. So some people love being outside as much as they said they were during interview, and others are less so. But I won't tell them to be outside more and to go to room 13 more and all the rest of it. I do what Julian, and I learned a lot from his insight, set the ethos and then set the kind of energy to attract that sort of thing in time. And it's a slow burn, and in the end, people do come on board. So that's my response to your question.
It's also the clearer you are about your mission and the clearer you articulate that about what it means to work in a particular institution, then that enables them to make a considered decision. Because often I think when schools are doing it well, it looks easy and people think, yeah, this looks great and I really want to work here. They almost have to see the worst of you and really understand what daily life is like and what goes into making it look easy to make that considered decision.
Last couple of questions. Lady in the back row. I'm going to take two questions and then we'll wrap up because we're pretty much out of time.
My name is Elizabeth Kaiser and I'm just finishing a Master's in Careers Education and Coaching. So firstly, thank you very much for all of your talks. It's really interesting to hear different approaches. I am wondering where careers comes into your mission. I've heard you say at different points about preparing for the future. Where does career come in? Do you engage with employers, etc.?
Great, thank you. And there's a gentleman in the second row. Yep, right here. Could you wait for the microphone? Sorry, sir. Otherwise, people at home watching can't hear you. So.
Okay. I'm just wondering, do you come up against sort of challenges with when Ofsted visits or from any others? I mean, thinking about the risks you take, I mean, there's people who come along from the local authority maybe and check out your risk assessments and that. But what do how do you feel you fare with having a mission that maybe is out of sync with the status quo? Do you come up against it? I mean, do you have to knock your head against it, or do you just blast straight through it?
So again, this is back in 2016, the chair of the Health and Safety Executive for the whole of the nation contacted me. I got a phone call whilst I was on a health and safety course, and I thought, oh God, something's happened. And it turned out she wanted to collaborate with me and to do a big media thing with BBC and the Times, etc., saying that the Health and Safety Executive are not opposed to any of the activities that I've talked about. And she was filmed shooting with the children, seeing the water buffalo and so on and so forth. And she said, actually, what the profession has done is they've believed these sort of media myths, which are perpetuated by certain parts of the media, and it's actually kind of like an easy option to believe that you're not allowed to play with conkers and throw snowballs than it is to actually accept the reality, which is that you're allowed to do all of that by the highest health and safety body in the land. Same thing goes for Ofsted. Although I get really paranoid and neurotic about Ofsted before they come, and I dream about them, that the school's on fire and I'm running around naked and all that kind of stuff. When they come, they're always really sound, lovely people, old school educators who can see that the children are doing well and that they're happy with their school. And again, I think the reality, particularly now with Amanda Spielman, who so far I've got no criticism of her at all, I think we're in a really, really good place. And no, it's been celebrated every time somebody's come to the school.
Any final thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, we try to do quite a lot in terms of careers, especially with the teenagers that we serve. And the newest school that we've opened, so we're an area that's a Polar 1 area, which means very few young people will go to university. They're choosing to go straight into employment or into apprenticeships. So we got together with the largest local employers, who were Eurotunnel, EDF, the Port of Dover, and said to them, why aren't you employing more local kids? And they said, because to get on in our organisations, you need to be able to speak in French. So one of our schools, the kids are doing 4 hours of French a week in a secondary school. And we've already said we don't mind what grade they get in their GCSE French. The purpose of it is so that they would be able to go and work at Eurotunnel and do cool things with computers underneath the sea. So yeah, careers is really important. It's got to take, the education has to take them places.
Nicola, final word.
Aspirations are critical, and opening children's and families' minds to what is out there is really, really important. So for us, we do incredible amounts of work around raising aspirations of children and their families and opening their eyes to what is beyond sort of a mile radius of where they live. So definitely do spend a lot of time interacting with lots of different people from different, organisations who do different roles. And when you see an actuary explaining to a 5-year-old what their job is, and a 5-year-old then being able to tell you, that's why I need to learn maths, is really special, because they put their learning into context and they think, okay, well, I might fancy doing a job like that, or a similar job, or a different kind of job. But what those people are telling me is, A, it's not easy. Everyone's overcome hurdles, and we get people to talk about that. And B, what is the knowledge and the skills that have really helped them, which then helps you to bring it back into the classroom and bed in, so that they see a real purpose to what they're learning.
That's great. I'd just like to
very
say
quickly,
that the girl in the picture with the water buffalo at the beginning of my talk, 10 years ago, she really connected with the Hera, who was the matriarch of the herd, and she contacted me about a month ago to say, oh, Mr. Fairclough, just to let you know that after I went to secondary school, after leaving you, I went to Plumpton Agricultural College, and now I run a herd of 3,000 cattle, my own cattle. So I think there's a very definite link between the kind of education that we provide our children and the work that they end up going into.
What a brilliant note to end on. Listen, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. We have a network which is a RSA fellow-led network called the Innovative Educators Network. So if any of you are interested in looking at some of the issues we've talked about tonight in greater depth, in getting involved, please do join that network. We're also planning a programme of work about mission-led schools. And we want to work with the sector and sector bodies, NAHT and Astle and the Chartered College and others, to think about what sort of changes to both policy and practice within schools are needed to help more schools put their mission at the centre of what they do, because every school has a mission. The difference is how able they feel to put that mission at the centre of what they do. And so we're keen to cultivate and support mission-led school leadership. So if anyone here wants to get involved in that, please do get in touch. For now, I just want to thank all of you very much for coming, and if you would join me in thanking our fantastic panellists for their presentation.